So our last workshop, we started looking at what effective feedback is actually consists of. And today we're really going to focus on the actual purpose of the feedback and how you use it to make sure that you're moving the learners on. Do please write your name, your role, and where you come from in the chat while I'm rabbiting away. And the objective today is to actually reflect on the language we use when giving verbal feedback to ensure we extend and include all our learners. So why feedback? Well, as a pretty important chap, I think by any definition, Bill Gates says, we all need people who will give us feedback. That's how we improve. So what we're going to be looking at today is what we actually mean by feedback that helps us improve, not just the well dones and so on, but what actually helps us move on. Show next steps and be sensitive to the needs and the attainment of the individual. So in other words, it needs to take into account what the individual has achieved, what they are, the level that they're achieving at, and take that into account. So we'll have a little look a bit further now. So what are the different ways that we give feedback in the classroom? So there's three key ways. So there's verbal, which is immediate and it's responsive. So we do it responding to something that has happened and in class. Non-verbal, immediate and responsive in class. So non-verbal, you know, as teachers, you'll all know when you give somebody a slight look to tell them that they need to listen, or a raised eyebrow to say well done, or a thumbs up, etc. And then written, which gives the learner time to think and reflect, generally requires work on next steps, further work, more detail than it takes the teacher longer to actually do. Obviously, it's possible to give verbal feedback after a class, etc. But generally, with the kind of feedback we're looking at today is the feedback that you give during the lesson to keep the learners moving on. So have a look at these pieces of feedback here. And what are your immediate thoughts on these pieces of verbal feedback? So good job. Let's all clap Brenda for getting the answer right. Nice work. I can see your effort here. All of those positive, encouraging. Anybody got any thoughts about those? Do write anything in the chat while we are speaking. I'm just going to get the chat up. I'm just going to move it over. Oh no, that's probably, you probably can see my chat there, can't you? Which isn't ideal either.
All right, I will keep an eye on the chat, don't worry.
You keep an eye on the chat.
Yeah, please feel free at any moment whilst Eleanor's doing the presentation to write in the chat any of your thoughts.
So have a think about your own feedback, because when you look at these on the surface, they look like positive, good things to say to our learners. We're encouraging them, saying, well done, they're doing it right. You can see that they've tried. But what we need to think about is, what is this feedback actually doing for the learner? I remember reading something recently which was saying, are we as teachers there to be cheerleaders, or are we there to teach? So what that means is, are we there to be the ones saying bravo, which of course we are up to a point, or are we there to actually keep them moving? We have a short video to watch now, which is going to encourage thinking about these questions a little bit further. So this is something that is in our course, Growth Mindsets. We're just going to have a little think about how effective is your feedback. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this.
How effective is your feedback? Watch this short clip and consider the feedback Mrs. Jones gives Mary. Who can tell me how Tom felt when he found the money? Mrs. Jones chooses Mary to answer. Mary answers pleased. Mrs. Jones says, well done, Mary. Clever girl. Read the following questions carefully. You might want to pause the video to give you time to consider your thoughts.
So let's have a little think about that one. And Alex, do pitch in with if we get some ideas in the chat. So obviously Mary's just done well. Mrs. Jones says fantastic. But what we would like to discuss is, if saying clever girl, does it actually provide meaningful feedback? And let's think about what the word meaningful actually means. Does it tell Mary what she did well? Does it tell the rest of her class what she did well? Does it perhaps suggest where she goes next? So although it's a great thing to say, is it actually meaningful apart from confirming to Mary that she got it right? I don't know if there's anything in the chat, Alex, or shall I keep going?
Keep going, I think. Nobody's written anything yet. Please feel free to type yes or no even into the chat. That's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Saying clever girl provide meaningful feedback. Is clapping Mary's achievement or asking the class to clap a good use of learning time? Does clapping Mary's achievement show her classmates the skills she used? Do they feel part of the lesson and the learning? Rather than clapping or praising the learner, it is a better use of time to focus on the skill used instead.
So,
what feedback could Mrs.
So when we've talked about clapping here, often in classes, children are encouraged to clap their peers and everybody says together, well done, Mary. But is that a great use of the time taken to do the clapping? It might seem a little bit brutal and a bit unkind, but children are not in school for very long, really. So we need to be maximising their time in the classroom. So it's better to give feedback along the lines of this.
They've given that would be more effective. This time, Mrs. Jones says, "This shows me you were listening to the story carefully." If Mrs. Jones praises the skill Mary used, everyone learns. What words or phrases told you that Tom felt pleased? Mrs. Jones could ask Mary to explain her answer. Again, everyone can see the skill she used, and everyone learns. When giving feedback, consider, does it either show what skill or learning has been used? Or, what next steps are needed to fix any problems with understanding or to keep the learners progressing? What changes could you make to your feedback?
Okay, so we've got a couple of things in the chat, actually,
right.
Eleanor.
Excellent, Alex, go for it.
I'm really sorry, I'm going to pronounce this name wrong, but Oliniluyi said it wasn't enough to say clever girl, we can actually do better. And then he said our use of words go a really long way. We then had a couple of people saying a little bit more. I'm just going to the end of the chat. We had Avashi, sorry if I said your name wrong, letting everyone know the specific behavioural skill that is being encouraged by the teacher so everyone could learn them. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We really value your feedback in there because you're our community and it's your words that are far more meaningful than mine. So the video focused on how giving good feedback can identify what went well to all learners, but it also signified the next steps. So we've been looking at the reasons that we give verbal feedback, and when I was preparing this workshop, I came across an incredibly useful document where somebody had really analysed the different types of feedback that we give verbally, and I wanted to share it with everybody today. We correct a mistake. So, for example, good try, but let's look at it again. You're acknowledging their efforts, but you're saying you need to go back and have another go. Asking for more information. What did you mean by this bit? Asking the learner to actually explain what they've done so that you are clear about how they've got there and they are clear about how they got there too. Providing more information. So that's you providing more information to the learner. What about trying this word? What about doing this instead? How could you make that better? What about this? It would be even better if. Appraising and praising. So good thinking, that is a good idea. Now we've just talked about that. So although that's important to say, ideally we would actually look at extending the thinking a bit further rather than just saying that. So you could say, good thinking, that's a good idea. What are you going to do next? What would you like to add? What could you change here? Confirming and moving forward. So that comes with what we've just said, actually. Yes, that's right. Now can you think about, so while you're recognizing what's gone well, you're all the time thinking, where next, where next, where next? Encouraging development. So now, what would the best way be to focusing on strategies? What did you do there to help you improve? Bringing the learner back to the skill, the strategy, the technique, whatever it is that they've used that's enabled them to do this good work, or even not good work. We'll come to that in a minute in the lesson. Redirecting learning. So that's a clear diagram. Now move on, making sure that the learners keep going on the track that you want. They don't get sidetracked by something else. Agreeing next steps. So now think about changes that you might make to improve, etc. And targeting learning, acknowledging what you've done well. I like what you've done well, or you've done so far, but your work could be better if. This is a key thing, is to show the learners, that's great, but we can still make it better. Encouraging reflection. So what worked best for you today? Just trying to move on to the next slide, just being a bit slow. Tech is not my friend today. Sorry, everybody. I can't seem to move on to the next slide. Right, okay. Just thinking about the feedback that we've been looking at though, what do we do when the learner's answer is incorrect? What do we do? How should our feedback change when actually it's wrong? It's wrong. What do we think about these bits of feedback? I'm imagining that you're immediately looking at them going, heavens no. Wrong, weren't you listening? We've been through this many times. What do we think about those bits of feedback there? Are they conducive to supporting learners to think, try something different, reflect on where they went wrong perhaps, go back and explore what they've used before?
Avashi said it's demotivating, which is absolutely right. Because they're not sure about what they did wrong. Thank you, Avashi, that's really useful.
Exactly. So these are our ideas. What would have been more effective feedback here? Let's go back to the beginning and try each step again to see if we can work out where you got muddled. Or think back to when we did this previously. What helped you then? Those are just two examples. But it's very easy sometimes, I think, and certainly I'll be honest, I know I felt this when I was teaching, is when you feel that you've done something again and again and again, and a child still isn't getting it, and you think, oh, we've done this so many times. But the answer is, it doesn't matter how many times you've done it. If the learner still isn't getting it right, then you as the teacher, you're not doing it right. So you need to go back and think again, what can I do to improve this? What can I do to make it easier? So as you know, with our workshops, we aim to keep them quick and short because we don't want to take up loads of your Saturday, and we want to make sure that we get as many people engaging with us as we can. So we're going to be coming to the end here, but I want to know, or we would like to know, how has this quick workshop made you reflect on the verbal feedback you use to your learners? And what changes might you make to your classroom practice? We would really love to hear some ideas in the chat function here, even if you're just saying it's confirmed that I'm giving the right kind of feedback, or I'm more or less, I think my feedback is effective, but it's just woken me up a little bit, maybe reflect. Certainly as an experienced teacher myself, there was never a workshop or a training that I attended that didn't make me reflect on my practice in some way. So we'd love to hear any of your reflections or any of your ideas about what would be better feedback or than the wrong. Have you got anything in the chat, Alex?
Olaniluyi is saying my choice of words will change from now. We've had a few people talking about the different types of feedback
Okay.
and saying how discouraging some of those phrases were that you were talking about, the words wrong, etc.
Absolutely.
You have done well, but let's look at it again. Fester said it was discouraging. The learners wouldn't know what they did wrong or how they could become better. They won't be able to bring change in their behavior or learn or unlearn something. That's interesting about the unlearning principle. Vashi says, praise the effort, give the exact points where they showed that behavior. There's some really lovely comments.
Thank you so much. It's actually making me think of something I read this week that I found quite sobering, I mean, depressing, which is that in certain environments globally, 43% of teachers feel that if a child's parents are not well educated, that there isn't much point in educating the child. There isn't much point in making an effort with that child because they come from an uneducated home. They're going to be the same. And teachers bring this belief to their teaching. And I was so shocked by that, and it made me reflect a bit on my own teaching. So in other words, it's 40% of 3% of teachers, and I can't believe it's any of you because you're all here on a Saturday, but 43% of teachers believe that if the child comes from a home where perhaps the parents can't read, or they are what one could consider ill-educated or not, or uneducated, that their child therefore isn't worthy of the teacher's efforts either, which I thought was absolutely dreadful, actually. It's a recent report that's just come out. And I think that's where our feedback is very important, because our feedback, even subconsciously, when you're just saying wrong or won't you listen, we've been through this many times, you might not have, not you, but the one as a teacher might not have the patience or the same amount of patience for a child that we don't believe is going to learn well. And the same bit of research on beliefs, on teachers' beliefs, said that the same number of teachers, the same percentage, felt that children who were achieving at a higher level deserved more of their time than children who were struggling, which again I found really horrific. So children who are doing very well and therefore perhaps are easier to extend and to push, those are the ones that some teachers were focusing on, rather than the ones who were having challenges. And that, I think, is where feedback again can come in, because your feedback needs to be thinking about how you can recognize what somebody has done well, but then looking, if we think back to that example with Mary, how can you use what somebody has done well to then inform the whole class? Alex, is there anything else from anybody before we bring today's?
No, that's it. Everyone, the chat has now gone quiet since all those lovely comments.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We've got another workshop in 4 weeks' time, and we're going to, you'll see in your follow-up email from today that we're actually going to take a long-term focus with the next 6 monthly workshops, where we're going to be looking at lessons and the different parts of lessons and how we use the different parts of lessons. Which I said to Alex, Alex, does that sound a little bit boring? And she said, well, it might sound a little bit boring, but we're going to make sure it's not boring. So I think that's fair enough. So we will make sure that they are not boring, but actually planning a good lesson is one of the most important things that we as teachers can do. And so we'll be focusing on what a lesson, how to make sure we're getting our lesson objectives right, how to make sure we're reaching all the learners in the lesson, how to perhaps give better written feedback than we might have been doing. So we'll be really focusing on how to plan a stellar lesson, but it's going to be a long process over 6 months, so with little bits for each workshop. They won't all be, you won't be able to, it won't matter if you don't attend one, they won't be connected and in that way. So if you end up having to miss one, that's fine. But we hope you'll find them interesting, and they will link to our planning course. If you haven't done our planning course, please do go on to Teach2030 and find our planning course. If you haven't got an account with Teach2030 yet, why not? Please go and join now and register for one of our courses. Alex, is there anything else?
No, I think that's everybody. Please let us know if you found it useful in the chat before you go. That would be really great. I know that you're going to get a questionnaire when it comes through. You're going to get all the post workshop resources with lots of the downloadables in there. So we hope you enjoy them, and please make sure that you give us some feedback so that we can continue improving and developing our workshop.
Thank you, and thank you, Bessie, for joining. Right, we're going to stay on with just our ambassadors now. So either goodbye or Alex will rudely boot you out so that we chat to the ambassadors. But thank you all so much for coming. It means a lot to us to see you all here. So
we've got a couple of lovely comments before we go. Really nice things. Please feel free, if you are finished and ready to leave, please go ahead. Abash said, thank you, have a great weekend. Tibetso said, I will improve my feedback to my learners. I will encourage my colleagues to do the same. How lovely. And please tell them, Tibetso, to come along to the next workshop, because as you know, it's completely free and we love to meet you all. Festa says, great workshop. I'm changing my language to my learners.
Thanks, Festus.
So any other comments, please feel free to type them in before we go.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all then, and thank you so much for joining us. Take care, everybody, and have a super weekend.